And now we are recording. So good morning, everyone again. My name is Daniel York with the GSA, Office of Government-Wide Policy. Welcome to the March meeting of the ACT-IAC IT Modernization and Management Community of Interest. This meeting is on the record and being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can mute your lines or mute your screen, your picture, your camera, or sign off altogether. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stu Hammer, my industry government chair, my industry chair, to get us kicked off.
Thanks, Dan. Do you want to bring up the slide again, or we good? There we go. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. As Dan said, this is I'm Stu Hammer. I'm with Perspecta. I'm the industry lead, and we're very excited to have this data security and governance panel session with really great set of panelists and speakers. We really focused on discussing their goals, lessons learned, success stories, and really leveraging how they leverage the technology around data, governance, security. This is a very critical topic these days, as we'll hear, given all the situations happening with security and especially around the data side. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Melvin Brown to take over, my another partner in crime on our IT management and modernization community list interest.
Thanks, Stu, and good morning to everybody. This is our March meeting, not November, and I'm going to be accompanied today by Mr. Bill Annabelle, who is the vice chair of our Modernization COI. But I want to go ahead and get started with this distinguished panel of speakers. And for the first question, I really want to dive into a more recent event. So as we think about security being paramount and being the foundation for all that we do, as it relates to data, but the SolarWinds attack hit us in a way that nobody saw coming. And so I guess I get to ask Gerald the question of, how do you balance, escalating mission digital transformation, but then balancing, maintaining, and protecting against our security vulnerabilities as a result of, the SolarWinds example?
Very carefully. No. There has to be a good balance. We always talk about, sometimes, people create a system with the latest and greatest gadgets and with bells and whistles and things, and then they try to bolt on the security after. And we're getting to this point now. It's like, and those of us that have been, in events and things, we got to bake the security in from the beginning, not wait and bolt it on after. And all right, now I did all this. What are the controls? And put that on. And I think we also got to shift our culture as a government more towards effectiveness versus compliance. We're very compliant focused, I think, with the FISMA and FITARA, and we try to make all those check marks like 800-53 NIST will say, you must provide authentication. Well, username and password is authentication, but is it effective? No, we know that. So how do we measure effectiveness? I'm a big zero trust advocate as well, which at the end game of zero trust talks about, protecting, I talk about protecting the data. What's most important? Do you understand your data? Do you have it categorized? What, protecting the crown jewels versus, the cafeteria schedule, and putting your efforts towards protecting what's the most important thing is something that I feel very strongly about. So I think zero trust is a good avenue to go, because at the end of the day, it's about protecting the data. A lot of people take it from the identity aspect, which is fine. That is a big pillar of it. However, the first thing the cyber guy is going to ask is, if you get compromised, Mr. Brown, what did you have access to? And is there an exfil? So it becomes about the data to me and how to protect that.
So Ron, same question. At NASA, you truly have technology that's out of space. And so that's you're probably the only one on this panel that can say that. But how do you make that balance of keeping things secure and digitizing and modernizing at the same time?
Yeah. Well, Melvin, thanks for having us out today. Really appreciate you, Bill, Dan, and Stu for convening the panel today for today's discussion. So I want to thank you for that first and foremost. Sort of like what Gerald was saying is we really need to lean forward with how we're approaching security. SolarWinds is just the latest example of where we need to start first with that security posture. But about the June timeframe of last year, myself and another individual in NASA were handpicked by our associate administrator to lead our digital transformation. And what we're doing is starting with our workforce and workplace and transforming the agency using digital as a lever to take a different mindset in how we're doing things and looking at security up front and how we're securing things. Melvin, you mentioned about stuff being off planet. We do have assets that are outside of our reach. We're not able to get to them to patch them. We have stuff at the outer edges of the solar system that we can never reach, right? So how do we do this in a mindful way that doesn't sort of slow down, that isn't an afterthought, and that is the cultural aspect of how we're fielding our services here through NASA is starting that with that security upfront mentality, starting in and everything is interconnected, starting with data as a strategic asset to make sure we transform. We start with an open culture. We start with sharing and not in a siloed based world. So it is in a sense more cultural shift than it is a technology opportunity, because there are Gerald mentioned zero trust. There are different ways of working, and industry's helping us sort of transform how we feel these offerings right now. And I think it's just a wonderful time to be talking about this topic. So really appreciate the question.
And so, Tom, how are we handling that from the Department of Commerce?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and thanks, Melvin. It's a great question. And in my role as a CDO, I'm obviously an advocate and an amplifier when it comes to things like security and working with our CIO office. So one of the things I make it a point of as the CDO sort of becomes a C-suite executive in this whole sort of ecosystem is really working with the CIO and understanding what is their space in terms of how they're going to provide that security level. What I can do as a CDO is really reach out and convene from a governance mechanism, what we call our Commerce Data Governance Board. And that's the ability to facilitate multi-bureau, all bureaus and offices to convene. And whether it's the topic of security or data management or privacy, innovation, all of these sort of areas that are really critical for the department to really steer the ship of the many ships of commerce that have different and unique missions in a single direction. And so I say that to say that, the specifics of this incident certainly woke up the organization in the sense that we need to be mindful. I think it's also one of these sort of bi-directional, meaning the CDO office is listening and leaning in on how this can be best preserved and reaching out where we can, and also coming back with how can the CDO play a role in terms of enhancing security when we get into discussions at, well, are we doing security at the data level? Are we doing it at the system level? And really having those conversations, because what's, like I said, interesting about the bureaus and offices, because of their unique missions, they need to be able to educate it about the requirements. And this takes more than just one office to do. This is why we have a CDO office and a CIO office, et cetera. So hope that helped.
It did. Great. Billy, over to you.
Just a reminder to everyone that this session is on the record and being recorded, just in case you joined late. Also, we like audience interaction, so if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop it into the chat, and we'll make sure to try to work it in to the questions we're asking. So I want to ask the next question, and Ron, I'm going to start with you. What are the biggest data management challenges at your organization?
Let's see. Good question. I think NASA is probably not unlike, Tom's job over at Commerce or others that have the role across government. We're very active in the CDO Council And I think we're probably pretty much in the same place if you were to look at some across the holistic view of where we are. Again, I'll just go back to the culture aspect is knowing what we have and actually inventory. So this is the federal data strategy, right? Inventory, what do you have out there? And we're just in the early stages of identifying, well, what is a strategic asset? What is a data set? How do you define that? So working with the programs and mission directors throughout NASA is very complex. Tom mentioned Commerce working with the bureaus. We have about the same federated structure as well. So getting people to sort of disclose what that initial inventory is, and then working on standards for interoperability. We don't want to grab everything and put all the information in one place. So we want to preserve the authoritative data sources, but also provide a way to connect and share information for better decision making through a visualization layer, for example. So we're working on that inventory phase. We're working on standards and interoperability. We're working on that visualization layer. So a lot of this activity is in alignment with the federal data strategy, and that's enabled us to put this topic first and foremost for the agency, right? So you have the compliance side to say, hey, you have to really adhere to the directives being put out, but it's really enabling NASA to be more agile in our mission. We have a goal that we've set forward through our digital transformation is to improve everything NASA does, including mission delivery, by 25% over the next 3 to 5 years. So that's sort of the goal we're anchoring to, and data sharing and all the things that I mentioned, the activities I mentioned, play a part in that.
Awesome, thank you. So, and then Ron, I'm going to let you piggyback on that. What are the biggest data challenges within your organization at DOC?
Did you mean Tom?
I said Ron, sorry, Tom, my apologies.
Tom, I sort of knew that was coming to you.
I was like, thanks, Ron. I was sort of like, well, Ron can do it again. Sure. No, Ron, very well said. And I really appreciate you introducing a couple of these topics of inventory, interoperability. They're so critical. And much of what the conversation we have at Commerce is, we all do very important missions, right? We have trade, we have the Bureau of Industry Standards, and we have no-fly, we have innovation data with patents, so it's a little, it's a rich family members in the sense of variety. And then really, how do we sort of pull it all together? And a lot of the conversation is around value. So what's the value for one bureau to even, sort of work with another, let alone share? And what's been really interesting is part of our effort is the listening, right? In the Commerce Data Governance Board is to the listen part of understanding what our challenges or areas of opportunity. And you'd be surprised, but mission agnostic, there's a lot of very similar problems throughout the and I hate the term problems. There's just areas of opportunity. There's similar concerns that are shared. And first, it's sort of the realization that others have that. And then something I like to call commerce helping commerce, which is really look within. So commerce has a very, very extensive inventory of data. And often we can have a situation where someone's looking for particular data assets. They go outside of the department only to realize it was really within the department to begin with that other department created. So the important here is really understanding the value proposition, and that could be efficiencies. And efficiencies are the type of thing that you want to co-collaborate with, and really understanding what that means through the bureaus and offices from the department level in a way where the department has autonomy in the say and understanding, and the department really has the convening power to make it possible, allows for this really interesting conversations to happen. And they're not just conversations, we end up having deliverables, which are enhanced ways of sharing platforms, whether they're data related, looking at the whole MOU process on data sharing. And it's really a way of how do we expedite this whole process. So, it is a data management challenge, when we look at common dictionaries just within a department, metadata standards, et cetera. But once you've flexed the muscle a couple times of, hey, can we all come together with at least our open data? And then the next time we come at it, it's more of an iterative process and not a start all over process. And once you show value through that incremental exchange, you're really able to have a compelling story as to, okay, now we're going to take on a larger concept. We're going to look at what does delivery look like when it comes to a data inventory. Is that a scorecard? Is that the ability for the public to weigh in on how usable our inventory is? And that's the maturing concept of the culture, is it's the willingness to say, I'm okay with the public weighing in on how well we do something because I'm mature enough to know what that means, versus we're just going to kind of keep it in a corner here and not talk about it. So I'm really pleased to say Commerce has really shown a mature approach to that exchange with the public, to really understand, one, internally, yes, this data is really accessible and usable, but if it's not accessible and usable to the public, I think we've missed a major opportunity.
Thank you, Tom, and my apologies for confusing you with Ron. But both of you gave great answers. But Gerald, I want to give you an opportunity to answer the same question, but you bring a very unique perspective because you're not a CDO, but you're a director of enterprise network management at the Department of State. So what's your biggest data management challenge within your organization?
So I think there's a few things. So one is categorization, properly categorized. And you look at FIPS 199, all those categories don't apply to us at state, for example. So we pared that down. So we made it easier for our data owners to be able to properly categorize their data, just like low, medium, high. So first of all, that, right? So now, all right, where does it reside? Do we know where the data resides when it's static or not in motion? And then where is our data going? Baselining what is normal data flow, I think is important, because if you got to protect the data, where is it going? What is normal flow? And baselining that. That's a very difficult thing to do in reality, is understanding, because I mean, we've been talking about the human aspect of humans accessing data, and it should be judicious, meaning least privilege, only accessed at the right time to the right people. So judicious in that way, and the different categories of data. If I want to access the cafeteria schedule, okay, everybody can probably access that. But I want to get to a higher level of data, I want to get to medical records or something, well, I should have some additional challenges or some different controls in place in which to do that. And then other factors, where am I coming from? Am I coming from a known network? Am I coming from a known device, a fully managed device? You know, there's a lot of factors that we got to take in this consideration, as well as conditional access policies. So the real challenge is in protecting the data, understanding what it is, where it's going, what is proper. And I think the other aspect is a lot of our agencies, we label data differently. Sensitive but unclassified, unclassified, top secret. What is sensitive but unclassified to me? Maybe for Commerce, maybe unclassified, you know, but I'm sharing my data with them. It's still my data. So I got to make sure that they're good stewards of my data as well, because it derives from me, and I'm the authoritative source for data that I may be sharing with them. So there's a lot, and a lot of the concepts I'm talking about are things that we've talked about forever, but they're not easy to do. I think we still struggle with some of these aspects. We're making a lot of good strides. I think there's a lot of good technologies that we can leverage. I think AI and machine learning is really, as that matures, is really going to help us with some of these challenges. But I still see them as challenges going forward as of right now. No good answers, no good prescriptions, but that's, I think, the work that I see in front of us if we want to properly protect this.
Awesome. So
and I think, one other thing is, I think we got to understand also, when we're doing data lakes and data warehouses, a lot of people, if I bring a lot of low categorized information together, that aggregation may not be low anymore. So I'm dealing with something else. So understanding that is important as well too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Melvin, over to you. And we have a plethora of audience questions.
Yeah, Gerald, I want before I ask you the next question, I want to extend on a question. I want to extend on Billy's question a little bit, because you talked about data sharing, and one of the questions from the audience, which kind of dovetails right into that, is how do you govern an environment to prevent opening up too much public data? What determines, how much data you open up, and where do you draw that line? It's a great question.
I think you got to, like I said, you got to be very judicious. You got to really apply least privilege, not just the easy button that sometimes we do. You got to understand what you're sharing, who you're sharing it with. Do I have good proofing they are who they are. You know, if they're using username and password, it's probably going to have a lot more risk than them coming in with a PIV card from a well-managed network with a well-managed device and stuff. So I think you got to take in a lot of factors dynamically, but you got to be very judicious depending on what the data is. You just don't open up and say, all right, here you go. That's just opening Pandora's box, right? So, what data do they need? What is the business need? What is the business driver? And being very judicious. And if you're sharing it with them and they're taking it from you and bringing it over, it's still your data. All right, how are they protecting it? So I think it's very important to build those relationships. It's a lot of work, but I think, it's easy for system administrators sometimes to push the easy button. It's like, oh, well, here, you have access to this kind of thing. We got to stop doing that. We got to be more effective if we want to protect this data.
Great. So let me switch gears for a second, because I've heard a little bit about culture, but I heard a key buzzword, and it's an evolving trend around AI and machine learning. And so, Ron, I'm going to go to you. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about you're not being able to patch stuff out in space right now, so it might be out of FISMA compliance. But how does machine learning and AI fit into your digital monetization strategy?
Sure. Well, good question, Melvin. And so if you just, it fits squarely into one of our six strategic thrusts for digital transformation. We have data being a core thrust, AI, machine learning, we have culture and workforce, we have model-based everything. We have how we collaborate with our internal, external partners. So AI, machine learning, we see a very big play here for not only how we tag our data, how we're able to access our data through automation, but we see it also through our process and thrust area as well, where we're bringing in robotic process automation to do routine work, to elevate the manual touch and automate that as much as possible. So that really fits into sort of that strategy and how we use digital as a core. But I'll just point to a recent, I believe, a national pride moment we just had with our landing of the Perseverance rover on Mars a couple weeks ago. So if you've seen that, and this was actually delivered out of our colleagues through our Jet Propulsion Laboratory, so that is a NASA organization, and they were able to take artificial learning or artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually land that rover autonomously. So if you took a look at that landing, we actually entered the atmosphere, we descended down, and we landed in the spot based on imaging that we had of the planet, and we were pretty spot on within a few handful of miles that we got to the actual planned zone. We were able to do that in an automated fashion where we didn't have mission control actually landing the vehicle on site. So we're using it off planet. We're using within our ways we're working right now. And I will tell you, we're, I believe, a very big leader in the government space on ethical use of AI too. So we started that work about a year ago now, and we've been working as part of one of our core thrusts, really focusing on how to really use this ethically, how to use it in a non-biased way, how to make sure we have our diversity and inclusion aspect of what this is. Because if you look at it, the core of AI is basically an algorithm that is programmed by programmers. So we have to make sure you're doing it ethically, you're doing it based on the rules, and it can't work in a way that is not controlled and not governed.
I have to interject that this is the first security discussion I've heard that used the phrase off planet.
Indeed.
It's a new one.
Tom, over to you. What does automation and machine learning look like over at Commerce?
Great, thanks, Melvin. So there's some really tremendous work that's already happening in the bureaus and offices. So when we say, we're very proud at the department to really talk about, NOAA having come out with an artificial intelligence strategy. So while many of us are doing data strategies, they've already gotten ahead on their artificial intelligence strategy, which is publicly available as of November of 2019. And they're obviously doing incredible work on prediction for weather and forecasting, all things and many things. I'm sure that we're part of the NASA involvement is satellite related. So at Commerce, we're really looking at all things satellite, and it really stems from sort of the oceanic and fisheries side of things. So it's a really robust organization that creates some of the largest amounts of data in commerce. And what they've really been able to do is apply this technology there to again, create value, and not just for AI's sake, right? We're not just sort of doing it so we can say we've done it. And what's also kind of interesting, it's also occurring at Commerce, is NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. And part of what the conversation, as Ron mentioned too, is sort of the ethical framework, is really, how do we trust the data that's training the AI models, right? So you have the algorithm, and the security concerns are not so much breaking and entering, it's sort of false training data, right? That becomes a major security concern when we talk about artificial intelligence. And NIST really approaches it from, how do we look at a standards? Is there such a thing as a standardized data set for artificial intelligence? These are really important questions as we roll out this technology, especially if we're going to look at trust and security on it. So at Commerce, we've got a couple different approaches. The Patent and Trademark Office is looking at some applied use around artificial intelligence to sort of predict documents where they belong in terms of a classification model, and that has to do with what technology they're related to, whether it's mechanical, electrical, that kind of a thing. Kind of like a library. If you want to find a book that's, a murder mystery that's sci-fi, you have the Dewey Decimal System to find that. So similar areas and opportunities at Commerce. Overall at Commerce, we're looking at ways to sort of do the illustrious low-hanging fruit, which may not be as exciting as some of these other areas, maybe not as exciting to landing on Mars, but some of the real pain points in an organization to know who is where in any given moment, right? Meaning this is a building security issue, right? How do we not, from a Big Brother perspective, know where everyone is, but if a incident is to happen, how do we actually know where someone is in order for emergency services to play a role? So we're kind of looking at some of these different areas that have potential, but again, it's a very exciting area. I think we have a metered approach on it. As many have mentioned, the hype curve around artificial intelligence, we have a metered approach, but we certainly have agencies like NOAA and NIST that are doing tremendous work out there.
Hey, Melvin, I just want to build on something Tom just mentioned, because he sort of rung a thread I think I'd like to just pull on just for a couple seconds here, and that's the veracity of data, right? And the trust in data quality. This is something we've been working on in the Federal Data Council, is how do we define the quality and provenance of data that we're sharing, right? How do we ensure that is the authoritative view of what we do? So I want you to just the audience to know this is something that we are working on, not only within our individual silos of agencies, but across the digital ecosystem of government, right? Across how we interface with the public. I mean, if you look at NASA as a scientific research organization, we have petabytes of data for Earth observation, for example, for everything that we do in the scientific community, right? That's available for folks. But how do we ensure what we see is actually factual, right? So we are working on this. We're working on bringing up an enclave to share information across different federal agencies. So this is something top of mind for me, top of mind for our agency, and top of mind for the federal data community as well.
No, thanks, Ron. Billy, over to you.
Sure. So another audience question, and I think this is given the prolific use of tools like Excel that are accessible on the desktop, right, to conduct business on an ongoing basis. Gerald, do you have any suggestions on how to protect that data that lives in a roughly less secure platform than maybe some alternatives?
No. No, Yeah, that's a tough one. It really is. Because like I said, you got to know where your data's going. You got to know where you got to be able to trace it, right? You can't protect it if you can't trace it. So where's it being shared? Where's it being stored? And you know, we're definitely in a mobile situation now. People are taking laptops, possibly downloading things. I like the use of when I talk about zero trust. I think virtualizing some sessions and things, so you don't download it, but it stays in a place where it's protected and containerized is a good thing. You know, that way they can still work with it if they're allowed to, or if they're supposed to be working with that data, rather than downloading it. And you know, people like to download things, put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and working on their offline and everything. But you know, we're in an interconnected world now, so I understand that there's sometimes that might be, but what is that data that they want to work with? So that's a real difficult situation, I think. You know, especially things like training, like who are you sharing with? Right now we have this interconnected with the cloud and these SaaS environments and things like that, and I'm sharing my mailbox with people. All right, well, if an adversary, you know, gets hold of that other person's mailbox, well, they can bind to my mailbox now. All they have to do is bind to it with a mobile device, and boom, there's all my email that they have access to, and off they're gone, kind of thing. So there's a lot of things and a lot of factors. What's happening is, to get to the point, is kind of our risk surface that we have to protect is drastically changing as we move to cloud and things. It's not this on-prem on this server here. It's now out there in a SaaS environment. You got to make sure it's still your data. You still got to know how to be able to monitor and manage it. It's on virtual machines. It's on-prem. It's in cloud. So people are putting it on their laptop, working on it. There's so many different factors I think that we got to take under account now, that it's not an easy thing to do. But it goes back to me talking about that baselining, understanding where your data is, who's allowed to have access to it, at the right data, the right access at the right time, where it's being shared and where it resides, and what is it, properly knowing what it is. It goes back to those simple principles to me. Not an easy thing to do, but it's simple principles and concepts.
Awesome, thank you. And I thought you did a fantastic job answering that question. So, Ron, I'm going to pivot to you, and we're going to change the subject just a little bit. We talk about culture, and we talk about kind of our staff. How do we get the data skills we need to unleash the power of the data that's available to us within your organization?
Yeah, Bill, that's a good question. I think, you know, back where Gerald is on, you know, how do you, and I see some comments in the chat as well. How do you really prevent folks from going off working on their own local copy? And it is about exactly this point, Bill, is starting with actually informing the workforce that, with a data mindset up front, with working in a transparent way up front. So and then providing services and capabilities in which to do that, right? You know, I think folks, you know, before the interconnected world, we're used to bringing down a local copy, working on it, doing their analysis, and then putting out their results, right? So how do we work in an ecosystem that is containerized, that is open for others to see? You know, just take the research side of NASA, right? To share the research, to draw conclusions out. So it is a cultural mindset. It is a different way of working, and it is done through training and awareness, right? What is out there? How can you work? Do you need to think differently? And I'll just go back to our younger generation entering the workforce. They're actually, you know, we're studying this problem right now. They're actually demanding that we start with transparency up front. You know, they're not accepting working in a silo where they can only see so much. So we're seeing that younger generation demanding more and wanting to understand more, and starting with that open mindset. and tools and capabilities where it really intersects with the IT world is tools and capabilities need to be organized in a way that actually is built in with that automatically. You know, you can't have collaboration tools that only work one way. It needs to be open, easy, and start with that awareness and training. So we are actually starting with our learning agenda as part of the Evidence Act, and that's one of the requirements in here, starting very early on our skills assessment, our learning agenda, and making a top priority for our workforce to really understand the conceptual change in how we work.
Fantastic. Tom, what about you over at DOC?
Great. Thanks for that. And I really do appreciate having this panel where we do discuss, you know, with folks like Gerald and enterprise architecture. That's a conversation that the CDO and CIO have extensively and sort of again, a bidirectional approach. And that really allows us to give requirements that help inform the technology piece. And to answer your question, they're sort of the technology platform. Sure, can we build something that folks can come on to use? Can we provision all the way to the level of data as a service? If it, you know, we're hearing from our agencies that they literally want to be able to just, you know, punch a meter and use, you know, Excel by the minute and then get out. Like, no one really wants to own the servers all the way to the level of platform, all the way to the level of, well, maybe I could just have my data come in and come out. And I say that because that's sort of a sense of the maturity and the level for which some of the organizations really don't want to own all this infrastructure. And that's the technology piece. And I'm glad Ron mentioned sort of the lead into the data skills, as we call it. So on the CDO Council, I had a working group on data skills and workforce development. And this is, you know, my role of playing sort of the stakeholder in chief, if you will, across government to say, hey, what does data skills even mean? And when we say unleashing data, it isn't just a door that we open. It's really how does our workforce interact with data? And whether that's insights, analysis, data stewards, and all that goes back to personas. Right? So are you an analyst? Are you a steward? Are you a CDO? Like, what is your sort of persona in all of this conversation? Because I'd be remiss to say we need to have the alignment or at least the linkages to these personas, to whether it's training, whether it's immersive training, whether it's you know, co-collaboration in an agile format, meaning you've got a couple folks tackling a single problem. But again, this is a reinforcement of data skills. And I think it's a longer conversation, but the unleashing part isn't, like I said, just turning a knob. It's really having a workforce that's able to unleash it for the purposes that we need it. You know, this is that sort of fit for purpose around data. It's one thing to make it available for fit for purpose, but it's also, what are you doing with it that makes sense? And what value are you bringing to it in terms of, if you're creating insights, and we have to look at the fact that, you know, we have an executive leadership that may or may not have a heavy or light understanding of how data strategy works, et cetera, and those kind of things. You know, how do you make sure that your audience is getting the same message? And again, that's kind of goes back to the unleashing part. It's one thing to unleash it. It's really another to make it the basis for data-driven decision making. Because someone has to make the decision at the other end of this. It's not just sort of, here's a really great data story, and then the question is, now what? I think we have to get more holistic about that. And that, to me, is part of what the data skills conversation and sort of workforce acumen around this means. And that's some of the work that Commerce is taking on from the federal data strategy and really getting a deeper dive this year by each bureau and office really going, what is your persona? So we've done some really interesting work in our working group on this, doing visualizations around personas and what does it mean to be this persona and that persona. Then we say, well, what is that technical domain? What's the sort of position description that goes into that? Then further taking it to, well, what are the training opportunities that actually round out that position? So if someone is in a role and they want to grow into the next role, what are the missing pieces or the gap strategy? So we are succinctly looking at that at Commerce across all of our communities.
Fantastic. Melvin?
Can I just add something to Tom? And
Sure, go ahead.
I love to talk about personas, and that's absolutely proper because you have to address that. But I think a lot of people talk about personas as in humans, and it's not always a human. So you have to treat system to system sharing as well as one of those personas, most definitely, because it's not always a human triggering something, but it may be another system. So that's got to be one of your personas or a set of personas as well, in my opinion.
Absolutely right.
Fantastic point. Melvin, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Gerald. And Tom, I want to piggyback on, I want to come back to the persona discussion, and I want to ask from a 21st Century Idea Act perspective, where we're looking at CX and UX, how is customer experience shaping your data strategy, and how are you using data to improve your customer experience at Commerce?
Great question. Thanks for that. So, really, we went through the process in the last couple months to push out our data strategy, and it's going through the clearance process. So hopefully soon we may be able to share this. But we spent a fair amount of time building coalition among the bureaus and offices, having them weigh in on our data strategy. And what we found was sort of round one was heavily on internal, making it work well. But I think part two is this customer experience and conversation about what does it mean once it leaves Commerce. And this interesting conversation is, and I think it was mentioned before, who's using your data and how they're using it. And we purposefully built in a feedback mechanism. So, it may be, changing the term of customer experience to some degree, but the customer experience includes for us how well or not well our data is usable, accessible. And again, can you find it? And we're often that Commerce, again, has much of the data that is of need when they want to do sociological evidence or economic or earth and scientific evidence building. A lot of it's here. So that is to say that our customer experience is not only just external, it's internal. I think if we can build the trust internally and really have a strong ear to what externally is happening, and that's obviously through our open data programs. And frankly, much of Commerce's data is open. There's certainly privacy that's statutorily protected, and then there's some areas that are security based in the sense that, that national security. So I think of it in those terms. But short of that, we have a lot of data that's publicly available. And our customer experience is really, how successful were you able at using that data? And also we're looking at bureau by bureau, sort of how their mission is being succeeded from a customer experience perspective. But really from a CDO and a CIO perspective, as we collaborate, is, how well is that happening in terms of, and being mature enough to understand what that means. So feedback is a huge component to our customer experience.
Gerald, over to you. Same question.
I go back to the AI and machine learning and the usage and understanding if we can meter. And, sometimes we give information, people want access to information. And so, it may be given, but they may never use it, or they use it once and then it's done. Then now you got an account out there just not using data. And what if it gets compromised? Then that person have access and stuff. So I really think, there's another opportunity, I think, to leverage machine learning and AI in this area. I would think that, which is very helpful. I do at our agency, we deal with all kinds of different levels of data. We have passports, visa data, medical data, a lot of unclassified data that, for the public, for diplomacy and things. So you got to be very judicious. And I'm going back to understanding what you're sharing, where you're sharing, how it's being exposed, and those things that you want to control. Make sure that you're metering and measuring, I think, as Tom's also talking about the things that he's talking about, and definitely, managing it, properly managing it, and understanding how you're managing it. Governance, data governance is a big thing. I know I'm on detail at a different agency at the moment, actually, and there's a lot of work around data governance, and how that, standardization, how it's protected, the governance of the data, adding new data to the fields. What does that mean once it's normalized and added? So there's a lot of talk about data governance, a lot of concentration around that as part of the enterprise architecture as well. So I see data as a sub-architecture to an enterprise architecture. What's the business need? The business need drives the data architecture, and the secure, then all right, now that we know the data architecture, what's the security around the data architecture, and how technically do I do those things? So all four of those pillars of enterprise architecture, I think, all interactively come together in one form or fashion when you talk about these things. So enterprise architecture, as Tom states, is a very important aspect, I think, because that's the governance, that's the guardrails, and that is the predictability of somebody knowing, I want to do this, this is what you need to know, because the enterprise architecture dictates that.
So Ron, over to you. What does customer experience and data look like for NASA?
So as part of our transformation effort, you know, when we're working with our mission partners to really identify areas of opportunity and synergy together, we are identifying not only point solutions from a particular program or organization, but where we can come and work on things collectively. I'll just give you a quick example, Melvin, and let you know how we use data to sort of get there. And that is our model-based, what we're calling our model-based everything. Historically, in our aeronautics domain for NASA, we've done models, and we actually build a physical model and put it in a wind tunnel and test it for, you know, for how it's going to behave. So we're realizing that we're not able to sort of take the advancements we need to do, not only in aeronautics but propulsion, right? So we're looking at nuclear propulsion for the next way we actually fly, not only on planet but off planet. So we're looking at model based for doing a lot of this research work versus the empirical knowledge of how we're doing this. So we take that customer perspective on how they work currently, what do they need to do, and we do our journey mapping through our design thinking to build in capabilities and functionalities to where we need to mature. You know, we're forecasting to build that next generation of nuclear propulsion would require NASA to come up with $1 billion. Well, we don't have $1 billion. So we're looking at what's being done in the Department of Energy with our DoD colleagues to see where they've used model-based to really advance going forward. So we're taking a data approach for not only the awareness, not only working with the customer needs and the complexities, obviously, if you can imagine, and the physics and everything required in doing this. So you know, from an engineering perspective, but we're taking a data approach to the selection of what we need to work on, where we need to work on, and then what do these features and capabilities need to look like in the future. So very complex matters we're working, but in a very different way and in a very cultural shift in how we worked in the past.
So gentlemen, I want to get to the final question, and we got about 10 minutes left, but I want to give each one of you an opportunity. You know, if you were to come back to your organization 5 years from now, what problem would you like to have seen solved? And so Tom, I'm gonna go to you first. What if you were to leave and come back to Commerce 5 years from now, what data problem would you like to have seen solved?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, for me personally, it's really because we have statutorial data both at Census and at BEA, Bureau of Economic Analysis, is the area for which, if we could solve data sharing in a privacy world, and that's a real challenge. It's not a security issue, meaning it's not technology, it's a statutorial issue. If we could solve, now 5 years is pretty short, solve the idea of, can we have a cloud-based strategy that of course has a data strategy in it that would allow us to share between those bureaus and offices that need statistical data, and that's what Census and BEA have, in a way that could have Commerce, you know, really provide some compelling insights. And I say that because that's our ability to respond to things like these executive orders, you know, not to just say we're being responsive just to administrations, but also to the public, being able to answer key questions. And we'd be able to answer these key questions if we could share from a technological approach across these platforms when we have these statutes in place about privacy.
Gerald, over to you.
Well, you added data. I was going to say a pay raise, but you added data onto the question, so I can't say that. But so one of the things I think I would like to see is it's not if we get breached, but it's when. You know, you always assume breach, but you need to be able to answer. Can I answer the question? Is my data protected at the end of the day? Is that important data that I care most about protected? Did I lose the cafeteria schedule? Okay, I can live with that. But is my crown jewels protected? Is there exfil? Can I definitively answer that? Sometimes it takes a long time for us to answer those things when there's a breach. So definitely that. And I think standards across the government of how we classify data is still needed. We still classify data in different ways depending on our agencies, because we're a little bit of special snowflakes in a way. But like, you know, DOD is going to be different from the executive agencies. You know, how can we get on that same page to properly classify the same types of data across the board and not have these differences, so that when we share in data, we definitively know, you know, that it is this classification of data over there as well as over here. So I think some standards like that along those lines would be very helpful across the government, not just, you know, done by the agencies and up to interpretation in some form or fashion.
Ron, over to you. Final thought. What would you like to see changed at NASA as far as data? What problem would you like to see solved if you were to come back 5 years from now?
So thanks, Melvin, and it's a pleasure being with you all today, fellow members of the panel and the audience. Really good questions today. So I think what I would like to look at this opportunity where NASA becomes really a people-centric approach, and where we have borderless collaboration in how we do our work today or in the future. So you know, how we do that currently is a very programmatic, a very geographic location view. I would like to see us working across all these borders and reduce the complexity of how we share information as an agency. And we also share information across all domains in NASA, across aeronautics, across human exploration, across scientific and research. So to have the borders that currently exist and make you know, make data, liberate data for other uses, for other purposes. I would like to see us working in more of a visualization arena, and to reduce complexity, but also making sure that we protect our astronauts, we do things in a safe manner for our human exploration, and then make our information actually available for the public consumption. So I know that's it is absolutely doable to do within that time period, Melvin. I think a lot of it is thinking differently, and I keep going back to the cultural aspect of showing up in a different manner than we have in the past. And I do agree with my colleagues. You know, sharing information across the organizations where is a lot. We can gain a lot from what we're doing uniquely and sharing it broadly across the federal space as well.
Billy, back to you, Dan and Stu, for final comments, final announcements.
Yep, and I'd just like to thank all of our panelists as well as our audience for some fantastic questions and discussion within the chat window. So fantastic session. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully you did too. Thank you, Ron, Tom, and Gerald, for such great responses to our questions and rolling with them as much as possible. Over to you, Stu and Dan.
Right. Yeah, I concur. Thank you, guys. This was a great session. We could probably go for another 2 hours. So I appreciate all the input, and, you know, we had a great dialogue. So more to come. There's a lot of interest here. Just to wrap up here, next month our meeting scheduled for the 13th of April, and we'll have Maria Rote. Is a very exciting session. We're looking forward to that, and and she is going to share with us many things that are happening at the federal level, and we're really excited about that panel session. Just follow on, we have continuing projects in play. We are wrapping up or closing out our accelerating virtual government. We have a TBM lessons learned and case study document that we are about ready to publish. This is best practices that we pulled from a number of agencies. And this is just out for final review and approval by the agencies, but this will be coming out. We expect that to be published within weeks. And then we're just about ready to launch, or we are launching a digital transformation case studies where we're pulling from industry, we're pulling from other governments to get best practices around digital transformation. So reach out if you guys are interested in the digital transformation or anything else. Dan, you want to close us out?
Great. No, just again, thanking everyone for stopping by today and having this panel discussion. I thought it was very interesting, and I do want to also thank the panelists. And with that, with 3 minutes left, we'll get everyone ready for their next meeting. So thank you all, and we'll see you in April. Bye, y'all.
Thank you.